Jeffrey Epstein associate Ghislaine Maxwell being transferred from a Florida prison to a federal prison camp in Texas. Her lawyer confirming the move just 1 week after Maxwell met for 2 days with Deputy Attorney General Todd Blanche, something that also reanimated the conversation about whether Maxwell could get a pardon. It's that possibility and comments by President Trump that pushed the family of Epstein abuse victim Virginia Giuffre to give a new and emotional interview, speaking for the first time on camera since Trump said Giuffre was hired away from Mar-a-Lago.
I think we were shocked by it, especially to use the term stolen, because she's not an object, she's a person.
A White House statement that says Trump did not bring up Giuffre, but was responding to a question, is not responsive to the question that was asked about his use of that word, stolen. I can also point out that her name is spelled wrong in that statement. The president denies any knowledge of what Epstein did or that he did anything wrong.
You said that Jeffrey Epstein stole people from Mar-a-Lago. At the time, did you know why he was taking those young women, including Virginia?
No, I didn't know. I don't know really why. But I said if he's taking anybody from Mar-a-Lago, he's hiring or whatever he's doing. I didn't like it, and we threw him out.
Joining us now is Mark McKinnon, former advisor to George W. Bush and John McCain, creator of The Circus. MSNBC legal correspondent Lisa Rubin joins me, along with Julie Roginski, Democratic strategist and co-founder of Lift Our Voices. I mean, Lisa, Maxwell has made it crystal clear she would like her sentence thrown out or reduced. Typically, if you have someone in the middle of an interaction with federal authorities, if you suddenly hear that they're being moved, can we say that this is likely part of some agreement or no?
I think what we can say, Chris, is that it raises questions about why Ghislaine Maxwell was moved from FCI Tallahassee to the federal prison camp in Bryan, Texas. It's not known whether she has any family there, for example, that would raise the circumstances that she needs to be closer to people to visit her. But what we do know is that security is always less at a federal prison camp than it is even at a low security institution like the one she was at in Florida. We also know that there are fewer restrictions on inmates and that the goal of a federal prison camp oftentimes is more rehabilitative than it is punitive. Inmates are taking classes, they're enrolled in programs about financial responsibility and management, all the sorts of things that you would want for somebody that you're expecting to be out on their feet in some time and that you're hoping will be a contributing member of society. Ghislaine Maxwell was sentenced to 20 years in prison, and while that's not necessarily the rest of her natural life, it's not as if a 20-year sentence for child sex trafficking is of the variety that we expect somebody to be rehabilitated for. You're not expecting.
Well, wait a minute. Can I also ask you this? To be rehabilitated, don't you have to have a belief that you have something to be rehabilitated from? She has never expressed any remorse. She has always denied any sort of wrongdoing.
Well, that's certainly true, but that doesn't mean that while she is in the federal correctional system, she wouldn't welcome a less restrictive environment than the one she was in. I should point out that we understand that while she was in Florida, she was housed in what people would refer to as an honor dorm, so the least restrictive housing situation at that prison. Still, in being moved to a federal prison camp, that is the least restrictive option within the federal correctional system. There are in fact only 2 facilities of that nature in which female inmates can be housed in the federal system. The whole thing, Chris, is very curious. And as you noted, while Ghislaine Maxwell is still engaged in this very public dance with the administration over whether she will get a pardon or a commutation, it just raises more questions than anything else.
Yeah, and Julie, I mean, there was a local paper in Florida that reported that in the Florida prison where she was low security, she was teaching yoga and etiquette. This interview with Virginia Giuffre's family, again, the first time we've heard from them since the president's comments. I want to play what they said about Ghislaine Maxwell.
Our sister always told us that Maxwell was even worse than Epstein. We said it in the statement that she was a monster. But this is a woman who used her womanhood to prey on young girls vulnerable young girls. And she wasn't a light participant. She's convicted of these crimes. And the thought of offering her leniency or a complete pardon, it makes us feel sick.
I don't want to put words in their mouth. I can't presuppose, but you would have to believe that people who have been categorically against any kind of leniency for Ghislaine Maxwell would not be happy about even a move to a facility that is slightly less restrictive.
You know, I don't think we spent enough time in this whole Epstein Files episode thinking about the survivors. And let's just talk very briefly about what these survivors went through at the hands of Ghislaine Maxwell, according to what they testified to. She threatened to feed one to an alligator if she did not go along with whatever Epstein wanted. She took the passport of another to prevent her from leaving Epstein's island and kept her captive in order to have her do whatever Epstein wanted. She threatened the lives of several of these young girls, and they're girls, they're not women at this point, if they didn't do what Epstein and she wanted. This is a woman who, as the family of Virginia Giuffre said, used the fact that she was a woman and an older woman to ensnare young girls into basically sexual slavery. And the fact that we're even remotely discussing whether she has to get out of prison for that is just, it's miraculous to me that nobody's thinking about what these survivors went through at her hands. She was convicted by a jury of her peers. These are not mere allegations. She's a convicted felon, and she was convicted for trafficking underage girls and effectively into slavery, as I said, sexual slavery. And nobody's really thinking about that when they're talking about, well, she's moved to, a lesser facility, she's gonna have more time to do yoga, whatever she's doing. Who's thinking about these girls and the trauma that they went through because Ghislaine Maxwell exposed them, ensnared them, and effectively sold them into this? And we're not thinking about the fact that she did not do this on her own. There are men out there walking around today who had sex with these underage girls because Ghislaine Maxwell, because Ghislaine Maxwell effectively put them in harm's way. Those men need to be held accountable. We shouldn't be talking about giving her a pass. We should be talking about holding those men accountable because these survivors demand it.
Well, Mark, when you see the family, their pain very viscerally, understandably, and the upset they feel, saying, my sister was a person, not an object. I wonder what that does mean for the whole conversation of how people look at Donald Trump, how he's handling all of this. Yes, I think the big MAGA push is looking for the conspiracy, looking for things that may or may not be there. Certainly the reports that have been out there that NBC News has looked at have suggested that those things that they're suggesting are not proved in any of the investigations. But is there something to be said about how the American people react in the way we just heard Julie react, in the way that we heard the families react, and in the way an average person might react by hearing that someone gets moved to a better facility, coincidentally maybe, within a week after, we're told, cooperating, answering questions for 8 hours of the Deputy Attorney General?
Well, I think Julie's right. I mean, the focus on the victim has been lost in all this discussion about Maxwell and pardons and Trump and what does she know and the files. And I think it very powerfully returns the issue to what it should really be about, is the people that were victimized. And I think, listen, this isn't something that just Democrats or media are criticizing the Trump administration for. MAGA's on fire about it. And I think they'd be happier if she were transferred to Alligator Alcatraz than to a prison camp. I mean, just the notion of something as a camp tells you all you need to know. And even people like Megyn Kelly have been very critical about this process and says that Trump will face serious, serious blowback if there's any kind of a pardon or leniency for Ghislaine Maxwell.
And Julie Giuffre's family also told NBC News now that Jennifer would actually have wanted the Epstein files to be released. Take a listen to that.
She wanted everything that happened to her very clearly, and everyone who was implicated in that, she wanted that to be released. And she was still fighting for that before she left us. So I think She wants what we all want, is transparency and justice.
There is a big question about the influence that the family has. As we know, Ms. Giuffre committed suicide, but there are still many other survivors who are out there. What influence do any of them have?
Well, look, it's difficult for a survivor to come forward at all. It's a very, very, very fraught process. Now, exponentially harder when you have the President of the United States and his entire administration effectively working to silence and move on from this whole debacle. They know who they were trafficked to. Some of these men were allegedly high profile enough that even a 15-year-old girl might have seen them on TV and known who they are. Back then, in the early 2000s and the 90s, when this was all going on, supposedly. I understand why it's so hard for them to come forward, not only because it's an incredibly traumatic experience that they probably don't want to relive in the public glare, but also they were conditioned, as I said, from a very young age by Ghislaine Maxwell to believe that if they spoke up about anything, they would die. And then they see somebody like a Jeffrey Epstein dead, and then they see somebody like a Virginia Giuffre dead, and they start to think, why would I want to get involved in this? Why would I want to come forward? Why would I want to tell my story? But they know who they were trafficked to. It's not just Virginia Giuffre, who's sadly passed away. There are women right now who are alive who know who they were forced to have sex with by Ghislaine Maxwell, by Jeffrey Epstein. And it is entirely up to them as survivors as to whether they want to come forward. But again, what people who want to cover this up have to understand and believe is that it only takes one to come forward, to start an incredible domino effect where others could come forward to corroborate their stories. So I think it's really a ticking time bomb because it's only a matter of time until somebody speaks up.
Mark McKinnon, Lisa Rubin, Julie Roginski, thank you. And coming up, bipartisan mayors sounding the alarm over President Trump's tariffs. We'll speak with two of them from a state that does big business with Canada. Next.